Shalom Aleichem. I have the chance to speak with a lot of very cool, smart, interesting people, and one asked a question that I did not know how to answer, and I was stumped for over a week, and I wanted to share with you a teretz that an answer that I think I'd like to give, but first I'll let you think about how you might answer this question, and please share in the comments. The question is, you're a person who's particularly bothered by a number of philosophical questions. One of them being, is logic true? And this is a question that indeed affects the person and bothers him, even sometimes when eating food. Should a person eat food? It's logical to eat food, but what if logic is not true? Should a person eat food? And secondly, also before you think to respond with something like laughter, I might mention that the koyach itself, the ability to allow truth and thoughts and philosophy and ideas to really resonate with you and affect you. So that is a positive koyach, a positive trait, meaning the fact that a person can think about something and it actually impacts him. So that could be a very positive thing, with the ability then to hear Musar and to learn important things in Torah and to everything Torah is important to learn important things and to allow it to resonate inside the person and change things and affect them. So I'll mention then the second question, which is, are we in a simulation? And the reason simulation being that we observe a reality, but that reality is not at all the reality. Rather, there's something that's creating it, and we perceive it as reality. We perceive objects as being objects, but they're not really there. And so these two philosophical questions led him to have different questions regarding Judaism. For example, if there's certain fundamental axioms, like is truth, is logic true? So then, if you use logical arguments to show that Judaism is the most compelling religion, well, how do we know that logic is true? And therefore, he has certain sfekos. And so there's a number of different ways to respond to such a question. One of them might be to speak about the concept of Sfeikos. We do have such a concept in Torah. It's moide that there is such a concept. Moshe Shapiro, I believe it is, said that a person's chayev to be logical, to use common sense. Most people in the world, and of course in Yiddishkeit, we do understand that logic is true. One might also disconnect the concept of true is something true that already assumes a framework of logic, a logical framework. So it might be a matter of semantics to some degree, but certainly the individual still understands the concept itself, with or without the semantics, to be something that bothers him. So I'll address it as though it's not pertaining to semantics. And and the way that I would like to address it is that um, a person, rather than building up from axioms, because one path philosophically might be to start with axioms and then eventually you build things up and get to Judaism. But that's not the only path, and logically there's no reason to say that that should be the path. One could take a path to assume that logic itself is just a tool that Hashem creates the world, and in that world introduces a number of tools that we can use to achieve certain things, and logic being one of them. Similarly, in science, we have the scientific method, and it's a wonderful thing. We can use it to cure cancer and to help people in a number of different ways, to defend the country, and it doesn't mean that the science is exact. Any measurement that you take, there is some fundamental inaccuracy. There are some limitations. So too with logic, there's limitations, but that doesn't affect the utility of it. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have value in to be something that has some element of truth or something of value. And the way that I want to approach it here is to say, let's, instead of letting the axioms be what you start with, let's start with ideologies. Let's suppose there's a number of different ways to see the world, perspectives with which to see the world. And I would first want to ask that individual, 1 + 1 = 2. Is this something that he feels is bothersome to him? Meaning the idea that logic is not true, that he experiences when eating sometimes, that he feels that eating itself may not be logical and perhaps he shouldn't eat. So by 1 plus 1 equals 2, does he similarly have what he described as a significant suffix, a real intellectual suffix by that? And so if not, which I assume is not, I assume that it's not. So then he's not concerned about logical impossibilities. Similarly, Rav David Gottlieb asks, can Hashem create a rock that's too heavy for Hashem to carry? And so the concept is just a logical impossibility, meaning if a divine being is all powerful to create something that divine being cannot lift, so that itself is a logical impossibility. And so from there, I think the place to go could be to say, and share with me what you think of these concepts, and again, your own concepts. To say, let's list out the number of possible ideologies, the number of ways to perceive the world, and the number of ways to live. These could be separate things. They could be, together. You could have the ideology combined with the way of living, and I think you really have to. It's as I mentioned in Emunah and physics, you can't have a way of life that's not tied to some ideology. Everything we do is motivated by something. So to say it's completely not logical or based on any ideology is impossible. And so amongst these different ideologies, there are some that might say that logic is not true. And so within those possibilities there, so then this individual does eat, and so perhaps you would say if logic is not true, so then that should yield a lifestyle and a way of life where a person lives in a way where logic is not true. The person should not eat. Because if a person eats, and it's logical to eat, of course, so then consistently the person is acting in a logical way, and that's incompatible with a lifestyle and an ideology in which logic is not true. So that itself is a philosophical impossibility, a logical impossibility. And so those worldviews and those perspectives, while they may intellectually be something a person can think about, so practically the only way that this person realistically, pragmatically is going to use them and live in such a way is going to be to live in a way that's not logical, and sometimes to eat, sometimes not to eat, or never to eat. And so therefore, this these ways of thinking are just not in the realm of what can feasibly be considered for this individual who is not accepting logical impossibilities, and therefore one can just ignore them, whether or not they're the most or the least logical, or the most or the least compelling. And I think that this individual, he agreed that it's more rational and more likely, he wanted to say, that logic is true. But of course, you can't use logic to prove whether logic is true. And so that's how I would respond to that element. And the other one regarding the simulation hypothesis. So within the Torah, there are things that suggest that the world is a simulation, meaning Hashem creates a whole reality, but the only truth is really Hashem. The only reality is really Hashem, and everything that we perceive is just Hashem creating a certain mask, or a certain thing that seems like it's separate from him but isn't really separate from him. So in fact, the fact that science is considering these days finally the concept of a simulation hypothesis, I think that is something that reflects very positively on Judaism. But of course the question is what we do with it in terms of, if there's a simulation hypothesis, if the world's a simulation, so could a person think of the whole world is really just an experiment, and there's you can think of all kinds of different possibilities for all kinds of ideologies. Fake, deraisa, where it's mutter. So there's a reason. Also we see by microbes, if they're smaller than a person can see, so they're kosher, because Hashem made the world in such a way where, there's a tool of logic that Hashem gives us to do different things, and there's different faculties, intellectual faculty, and these capabilities are. They have limits, and because they have limits, we have to operate with them in a functional way, and need not be concerned with muta de muta. But so I think Rabbi Meir might be chayshish in cases for muta de muta though, so it's worth to it should be Mayan and Mirz Hashem. We'll find out. Let me know if you know already. And so regarding these possibilities, so because you can have a world that is a simulation and a world that's not a simulation, and it would look the same, right? Like if there's a physical world and we experience a physical world, whether or not that physical world really is what it is. So so the whole worldview, meaning the whole way we live, which is tied to a certain worldview, so it's identical. Is there any way that we would live differently if we find out the world is or isn't a simulation? Um, it would be some it wouldn't be. So therefore you end up with doublets, meaning you have say a worldview or many worldviews of Judaism, and within that you could have one world one worldview where it perceives it as a simulation, and one where not, and it could be different shitas understand differently. Please share if you know or if you've asked the Rav before regarding it. I hope to ask him to share as well sometime soon. Mitzvah Hashem, and so with all of these different worldviews and ideologies. So it's all couplets, all doublets. So therefore, there's no change in what a person is going to do in their life, or in how it influences the way we see the world, perhaps. Now, there could be coupling, and that would be an interesting question. I'm curious if he'll perceive them to be coupled, in that if the world were a simulation and we knew that it should change our actions. But I don't see any compelling reason at the moment why it should. So therefore, you have a certain amount of worldviews if the world is not a simulation, and that same amount of worldviews and ways of living and motivations if the world is not a simulation. And so therefore, it doesn't have any nafkamina, it doesn't have any output, it doesn't change things. And so therefore, those two things that perhaps were beginning as axioms from which he felt that he had to prove in order to be able to go like Avraham Avinu and to use logic to arrive at the Ribono Shel Olam. That would be one approach, perhaps, to answer. And of course, another approach is that the mitzias is ruchnius. It's not that our mitzias is logic, meaning we could use logic to do certain things, but our reality is that a person is a chelek mimal, that Hashem breathed the neshama into a person, and therefore the only mitzias is Hashem. So to take logic and to let that be the requirement to access anything else, so it's just using a tool that is not fundamental necessarily. And Hashem is choyne la'adam das, and so it's something to think about. And I would also mention, if anyone does have, something where if it's very bothersome for a person whether the world exists or not, there is a concept that I learned about recently called existential OCD, in which a person is like very troubled by these questions, can have trouble sleeping, and so it's something to be aware of also. Our intellect and our emotions and our spiritual reality are all intertwined and entangled, and I think it takes a realistic and rational person to be comfortable with that, and it's just fundamentally it's the truth of who we are as a mitzias. We're not robots, and so that is something to consider. If a person would have such a matzav. And anyway, I hope that you have a wonderful night, a wonderful morning, wonderful day. Thank you for listening, and please again share your thoughts. How would you respond to this person? Thank you.